Spellman, you start off first.
What? But this is going to be your channel. Whatever. Hi, I'm Kevin. I like things
I'm
and places and soda.
fantastic, Kevin. I am Julian. I like myself.
You always have to like yourself. I don't know where we go from now.
Right, so
We're all a
is
bunch
there
of
anything,
idiots.
is there anything specifically, that you've been wanting to talk about?
The thing is, we talked about a lot of this stuff yesterday. Like all I've been thinking about today is economics because of my class. That and like a few wine jokes my professor made because he grew grapes. Like, okay, here's something. Like, apparently during Prohibition, what the grape vineyards would wind up doing for local wineries is instead of selling wine, because obviously that was illegal, they would sell barrels of grape juice, and they'd write on the outside of the barrels, "Do not add X amount of sugar. Do not add X amount of yeast, or you will get wine." And that's how they sold it. And that's how they got around Prohibition.
Well, that is just classic America, right there.
Yes. One of the few interesting things that comes out of that class, because economics is according to him, and I will agree, the dismal science. So,
No, but like one of the most interesting things about economics, or rather about what you can glean, if you take economics and then study politics as well, uh, is that you come to understand that a lot of political situations that have very long lasting effects come about because some person somewhere was trying to turn a profit off of something, and then that turned into a huge mess.
and the Great Recession, these stock market crash and housing bubble popping, that all started with one person having ideas like, why don't, and now this after deregulation especially, but like, why don't I just sell my loans that I've given to someone? Like, horrible loans. Because it's a lot of risk. The person I'm selling them to, but then I don't have any risk, and I have the money profit off of it. Immediately, within a day, I can make a profit. And I can make a 5% profit on it. Versus making a 10% or a 20% profit over the span of 10 years. I'd rather have that money today so I can make more money today than tomorrow.
Right, right. But then, like, you look at all the kinds of stuff in history, right? So, most of exploration, right, throughout the world, it's done by merchants
Yes.
going around finding places because they're trying to sell something there, trying to get some new product to sell back home. You,
Yeah.
you get the entirety of America, you know, conquered. Uh, because some guy thought that the Earth was a little bit smaller than it actually was. You hit India from here.
Yeah. I don't
He was
like
wrong,
that.
and that was disastrous for many people involved. But it worked out for what he was trying to do, I guess.
You know, you mentioned that there was a really interesting video I saw recently. Is why was there no such thing as America pox of some sort? Why did Europe bring plagues with it to the Americans, but they did not bring any American plagues back to Europe?
Because they were cleaner than us.
No,
I know.
they had only one animal that they could domesticate the same way we could domesticate cows. That was a llama. And fuck llamas, they're assholes.
The mighty llama.
But they didn't have the same type of agricultural thing because the real diseases that that come at us and do the most damage, like smallpox, I believe, if I remember right, comes from chickens. the swine flu. It's in the name of it. Swine flu comes from pigs. The
Yeah,
biggest
I mean,
diseases.
a lot of them are, diseases that have mutated to become able to affect humans.
Yeah, but they didn't.
We had
But
a lot like that.
but over in the Americans, they didn't actually have enough contact with animals and so many animals around that they would have contact with to actually make that happen. Like, yes, they ate meat, but meat was more of a scarcity thing. It was like a luxury in the Americans in comparison to grain or whatnot. I mean, you heard the three sisters. It's corn, squash, and I think beans of some sort. I can't remember. It's been a year since I've studied that. But that's what is their main food source. Well, then there's that, and then there's also tobacco, but that's an entirely different thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've exhausted that conversation, that topic. It
Not
seems like.
necessarily, but it's very broad sort
Okay.
of idea there.
What I mean by that is that it seems like the conversation about that topic has kind of grinded to a halt. So now we're just trying to fill air by talking about how the conversation has stopped.
Well, that's what happens, right, when you're just rambling around without a game plan.
Yeah.
But then again, this is just more of a test to
An idea.
have everything running smoothly, In the future, of course, you want to obviously plan these things out better, or at all, actually.
Yeah, not use
So
all
we're
of our
just-
topics the day before when we get the idea to make
Yeah,
this.
right. No, but speaking of that, right, in the future, whenever we start having some conversation, obviously just start recording it.
That's a way to do it. Yes. But you got to make sure whatever you're talking about is interesting. Like, I don't know if talking about Yu-Gi-Oh, unless it's like the conversation about the logic behind and stuff like that, would really fit on a channel for what you're going for. But
Oh, no, of course.
But something like SpaceX with their Falcon Heavy or their BFC rocket, which is arguable whether it stands for a big Falcon rocket or big fucking rocket.
Failure rocket.
I wouldn't call it a failure. I mean,
No, it's not, but I mean, is that really what we need to be spending time and effort on right now?
it's the rocket that's
I
most
just-
likely going to be sending the first people to colonize Mars.
Okay, can we finish colonizing Earth first?
The only thing left to colonize would be the South Pole. I mean,
Well, I mean, you also have the oceans. We still
But
have
that-
sea lab.
that takes a lot more money than actually sending someone out to space, because you got to get the resources from somewhere to build some type of platform. And B, you could also potentially destroy.
Entire ecosystems, yes.
Now,
Well,
I'm
not
okay
that
with.
it's stopped anyone before.
Of course, it hasn't, because only like 3% of the population actually cares about things.
Right.
But
And, well, no, you see, a lot of people care about it. They don't really care about it. They're like, oh, well, that's terrible, but I don't actually want to do anything about it that would take time and effort out of my day. 'Cause that's just how people are, right? We'll think, oh, well, that's a shame, but it's not right there in our face, and you don't have the solution that we can contribute to right there as well. Most people aren't going to try to do anything.
yeah, it's
But
like-
if you look at it, there's just a lot of shit that I don't know. People just don't. I don't think we need them all. Really, all the people. A lot of them are unnecessary.
most people will do someone has an idea, I'll wave my flag in support of it, and then not even care about it. And if you ask me about it a week later, I won't even know what you're talking about. I've had those conversations with people where we've debated something and then they can't remember it the next week. It's frustrating.
Right?
Especially now, it's not been to my benefit most of the time, but I seem to have an amazing memory about oddest, most exact things about how a conversation went or how something was, and then I'll try to prove it to people. It is because they'll say something one day and they'll say something different the other day, and then they won't believe me. And then I'll show them proof, and then it's almost like Trump, where they still won't believe me.
Right.
It's frustrating.
Well, I mean, that's just how human beings are.
Mm-hmm.
The way the brain functions
Mm-hmm.
to encode memories. It doesn't work, you know. It doesn't like to not believe itself. Okay, so
Mhm.
whenever they construct, once their reality's been constructed, right? Well, I guess once our reality's been constructed, this happens to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you have some sort of
Well,
disorder.
we already know that
That
my
sort of
brain works.
process.
We already know that my brain is wired differently than most brains, seeing how the fact that I'm dyslexic.
Yeah,
Because I mean,
but that doesn't necessarily equate to other things happening.
well, the wiring is different. From
In
the way I
one
understand
place,
it,
right?
not it's mostly, but it's things are just. I know nothing about it, but from my understanding is that majority of the brain is wired differently, but most things, with the exception for if you're dyslexic, reading and stuff like that, um, that is where you begin to see differences. But like the way my thought process might be different than the way your thought process might be, or the way Joe's is, or Eric's. Um, and I've thought about this a lot. Like, I want to experience just for a day. Like, I don't truly want to change myself, but I want to experience a day with, let's say, a non-dyslexic brain. See how it is, because it's been scientifically proven that people who are dyslexic can do really good with things like engineering, architecture, and stuff like that. And on the other end of the spectrum, because it is a spectrum, if you are autistic of some sort, the way it works with, I think it's part of the difference with the space between the lobes of your brain, where dyslexia, I think, is closer together, and autism is further apart than it's supposed to be, or something like that. They are very good at things like math and so on. And they're the same thing. It's just they're opposites. So you can't have. So it's impossible for someone to be dyslexic and autistic at the same time. And so I'm curious about, like, what would it be like? How would I be different? What would it essentially what would it feel like to have a not dyslexic brain for a day versus having one? Because it's almost like it's to an extreme that's not even the difference between here's yourself regular and then here's your brain on drugs. Because it's to that next extreme above that. And it's just my general curiosity, because I'd love to have that question answered. Let's get my words right. But it's something that I'll never be able to happen, because, I mean, for the most part, and to our knowledge, your consciousness is tied to your brain. And so it was like they could put a different brain in my body, but then that'd be someone else experiencing my body. That would not be me experiencing a different brain. So
Right.
It's all intents and purposes impossible. And like, even if you digitalize my brain and rewire it digitally to act like a normal brain, well, that consciousness within inside of the computer, honestly, the way I look at it is that's not me.
That's not me.
So
Right.
So
you're echoing again, but
you're
still.
going again, but still.
What would be the best way to explain it? I've lost my train of thought.
It's
If it's not my brain, I feel like it's not me. It'll be someone else who's very similar to me, almost like a twin, but it's a different consciousness. So
Yeah, and that raises its own interesting ideas here, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
if you have an exact copy of yourself, right, which I believe, due to the nature of quantum mechanics, it
Mm-hmm.
is impossible to create an exact clone of anything
Mm-hmm.
unless you have multiple exact copies of it.
Mm-hmm.
But since you can't, then it's impossible to create an exact quantumly identical clone of something,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's important information there.
Yeah,
If
it's
if you're ever reading a piece of fiction or whatever, watching something, reading a comic, anything like that, right? And someone's like, "Hey, well, the clone wouldn't act like that. That's not how they act. So why is the clone acting differently?" You can tell them, well, because on some quantum level, it's a different person,
yeah.
right?
That's
So
like that'd
if
be
you
like
have something, continue.
that'd be for like a pure clone. Like if you're trying to get something exactly identical, but having a biological clone is
Then
something that
obviously it's completely different.
yes. But the interesting way that you have watched the Star Wars Clone Wars series, so this is a perfect example about that. You have an army of millions of soldiers, all genetically identical, but they
But not
act completely
quantumly.
differently. They are individuals still in their own right. They might act similar, they might think similarly, but they are still completely different. The difference between Captain Rex and other people within the 501st, where they were siding with General Krell in that one arc on that Twilight planet. I can't remember what it's called. I can't remember that. I'm only good about this stuff. But some sided with General Krell over Captain Rex because they had that different disagreement, despite genetically being the exact same person.
Right. And now in the future, right, we could actually have an experiment
Mm-hmm.
depending on the constraints of morality at this point in time. Um, you can have an experiment wherein an individual is cloned genetically, um, and then essentially raised in different environments,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then you could actually see the results of, okay, so how can a person develop, you know, differently from one environment to the other if you start with the same genetic base. And you
Mm-hmm.
could really figure out what things are in fact genetic, you know, which things are purely environmental, or which
Mm-hmm.
things, the genetics act as some form of modifier to how the environment is perceived during development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like that'd be something where I would love to see. It's just that because of things being humane and stuff like that, even if they are clones, I feel like at least
Right.
in our lifetime, we'll probably never see that. The only thing we
Yeah,
could
we in our
possibly do,
lifespan okay, so in our lifespan, we're likely not even going to see human cloning, at least not full human cloning. We're likely to see partial human cloning, right?
mm-hmm.
That's entirely within the realms of what could be done within our lifetimes. In fact, it's probably a fairly safe assumption to say that we'll see some form of partial human cloning, maybe clone like a liver,
Oh
lungs,
yeah, through stem
skin
cell
tissue. We already
stuff like
start,
that. We
trying to
already
do
do
stuff
that.
like
We
that
already
now.
do that to an extent on very minor levels.
And see, if that really gets more complex, you could see things like cloning a
Mm-hmm.
heart to the point where, it's the sort of genetic material is structured in such a way that instead of turning into like a full being, it's just like a sack of flesh with a beating heart in it, so
Mm-hmm.
that the heart, is strong enough to do what it needs to do when it's transplanted.
Mm-hmm.
or regrowing bones. So instead of replacing a bone with uh, some other material, you would just replace it with a new bone.
We already see like the first iteration of something like that is the development for getting insulin. How they engineered bacteria to a special type of bacteria to one. I think it's bacteria.
Right.
I'm not sure, but it's engineered bacteria to secrete insulin, despite them not really even needing the insulin. They still secrete it, and that can be harvested and put into a little syringe, multiple-use syringe, and just used dozens of times per patient.
They have goats genetically modified to produce the proteins required to construct spider silk that's in their milk, and then you could put it the milk, harvest these pieces of silk from it, break that down, and draw out lengths of spider silk to be used for manufacturing.
Mm-hmm. And going back to go on.
Well, actually, that links in yesterday, right? You were talking about the one species from Star Wars that just hated artificial technology. They only liked biological technology, right? So basically, what these are is they're biological machines that we've created. Mm-hmm. Very, very simple, basic ones. Mm-hmm. Like the equivalent, machine-wise of bending down a tree to use it as a spring, something like that, like a sapling, or using a tree trunk to hoist rope around. It's like just taking shit around you and
what you're
molding
saying,
it.
What you're saying is very similar to what the Using Bong did, but not quite. But yeah, you're still on the right path with that.
But yeah, no, it's the same line of thinking.
Yes.
If you can manipulate organisms on the genetic level, you could construct whatever you need, essentially, and it could any biological process could be created. In fact, at the higher levels, or at the lower levels too, you could stumble across it or engineer it. Just perhaps not quite the level of direction. It could take longer, more trial and error.
Yeah.
But you could create a process that is not found naturally, but create a way to have it done biologically. That the processes of natural selection had not been able to produce, or not needed to produce. So hashtag dragons are real. One day, one day they're definitely going to invent dragons.
Oh yeah,
they're definitely going to use them in movies.
Yeah, I mean, just take other lizards. Maybe with some pterodactyl DNA they got from a fossil and combine that with actual Komodo dragons. Yeah.
I mean, who knows? I mean, they could, if they can synthesize, because essentially everything that utilizes DNA as its genetic material is essentially the same form of life, right? Because they really, we all evolved from the same two cells, I guess, that ran into each other and decided, hey, I'm not gonna just fucking devour this thing or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, replication starts. I don't know. It's very complicated, but we're all very similar genetically. The processes by which DNA is read and interpreted throughout species is fairly similar. That's why you're able to take the spider gene and put it in goat.
I think there's a little bit of difference between DNA, RNA, which is that bacteria your cell wind up eating and keeping around because apparently it was useful, and then plant DNA.
What about that ATP, bro?
Yeah, and then that plant DNA, which plant DNA is different because the entire molecular structure is different between. I mean, they have full-on cell walls and stuff like that and rigid, versus we have no cell walls and we're flabby and shit.
And you see, here's the thing. I'm not entirely certain of the exact level of genetic separation between plants and other organisms.
Yeah.
But I do know this for fact. Every form of life that is not single cellular is a goddamn commie.
All right. I think I
mean, think about
understand
it.
you, but
You just
explain.
have a bunch of cells, right? And what do? They all exist for the singular purpose, right, of making the entire being that is created from all of them together continue living, even at the cost of their own lives. You have cells that literally their purpose is essentially just to die.
The cells commit
Constantly.
suicide if they get infected of some sort
Right.
with something.
And what happens, okay, when a cell stops living for the organism, right, for the community, instead decides, hey, I'm going to live for myself, that cell turns into a cancer cell,
And
where it starts devouring
so
resources,
is
self-replicating.
cancer capitalism? And
Yes. Yes, it
is socialism, communism, true socialism, is that the natural order of things?
Well, now here's the thing, right? We've obviously proven now through this study, because they'll tell you capitalism, right, is the most natural form of whatever, and then Marx is all like, no, but like, just because it's natural doesn't mean it's what we should do. My counter argument to that is, well, yeah, the lion obviously is not a communist; it's a capitalist, but the lion's body, communist. But then here's the counter argument to that: what is the most prominent form of life on Earth?
Bacteria.
Yes, capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
Single-celled, self-involved, self-replicating. But what's the organism that has the most control over the Earth?
The communist organisms, like humans.
Humans. We can literally, in the course of an afternoon, just rage quit the whole planet. Just get rid of it. It's like, fuck
Yeah,
this, we don't
pretty
need
much.
this. Get rid of it. Fuck this life shit. No, we could. We are capable of just annihilating the entire planet very thoroughly.
You want a really high kill
don't.
streak on things? Just clap. You must have killed some type of bacteria by doing that.
You killed your own skin, right? Your body's like, hey, let me just kill some of my own cells, right?
Well, that's
on a
once you
whim.
get past the protective layer of dead stuff on the outside.
Like, on a whim, your body is perfectly fine with killing parts of itself, right? Just because you felt like it.
Mm-hmm.
Communism, right? Very good analogy here.
Yes, I will agree with you that this
Like,
is one
when
of
we want
the
to do
best ones
this,
you've
it's
done.
going to cause some issues for some people. We don't really care about that. Fine. But it's effective, right?
Yes.
Having everything work for a singular purpose is effective. But in order to do that, you have to have parts that don't necessarily work, on equal terms, right? Obviously, brain cells have more control over what's going on than skin cells. But skin cells are absolutely critical. You don't have those, the whole fucking thing is gone.
Yeah. It's also an entrance way for things that are needed to get into the body, like sunlight.
Yeah.
You need to get vitamin D from somewhere.
Right. You need all the little pieces of everything, right? But they aren't all necessarily having the same control, or even necessarily the same level of value, but they're all critically valued. And that's a good illusion. If you are in, trying to form some sort of communist society, real or fictional, that's something you need to really dwell on for a while. Just sit down for a few days and think about that. The fact that all the little pieces to everything are required, absolutely critical, but they're not equally important, equally competent, or equally powerful to each other.
We are the best machines that have ever been made. and our brains
We
are the
are.
best computer and control system that we have ever made.
We are machines. We are machines. Don't let anyone fool you otherwise.
Machines can be
machines that
upgraded,
evolved
taken apart,
naturally.
parts could be swapped out. At this point, swapping out, let's say, a liver or blood or something like that is the same way you might swap out your RAM or your GPU in a computer. It's just a lot harder to do because we are just so complicated.
Yeah. Well, it's not even that we're complicated, right? It's that there's so many different versions
Yes.
of the same model machine just all over the place, right? That, the parts aren't necessarily compatible.
You're trying to replace an engine from a 2006 Ford Expedition, using my car's example, but you have like a trillion options. Well, maybe not a trillion, but a million different options of engines that are available, but only like 3 of them will actually work to replace it.
Right. Oh, now here's a fairly interesting idea along with the lines of genetic engineering, right? Imagine a plant, okay, that grows meat.
That's going to be something that I don't feel like would happen anytime soon. Like, I believe it could be
No,
possible.
probably not anytime soon, but think about it, like, in the future, right? You can have some sort of, like, way post-apocalyptic world, like thousands of years from now. Utopia has risen and fallen, and it's like a whatever society, but all the products of just insane levels of genetic engineering, unnecessarily
the
complex genetic engineering, are roaming the wastelands.
The
Right?
one thing that
Society's restructuring itself. You have fucking dragons running around, fucking elves and orcs and shit all over the place. Weird shit that you don't even know what's going on. Fucking trees that grow meat, try to eat people. Who knows?
one of the problems I could see with, let's say, a tree that would grow meat instead of fruit is that, well, to make meat instead of fruits, at least just based off of what we currently see within nature, for every like 10 pounds of it requires 10 pounds of fruit to grow 1 pound of meat in an animal. Now, probably would not be that inefficient if you go right on the plant itself, because they're a tier 1 consumer, I think, is, if I remember what it's called from my science classes. But
Yeah.
like, the problem with it is that a animal eating different plants can get into different nutrients that they need, and get in stuff from the air and from the sun and from the ground and the
And
stone. But like, how
that's-
is a plant going to get in the proper nutrients?
and
to
that's
grow
that's
meat?
part of the genetic engineering is trying to figure out a way for it to do that. Now, here's an interesting idea.
Mhm.
You could construct such plants in a symbiotic relationship with some other life form, say ants, right?
Mhm.
That go out and gather those nutrients. No, it's not ants, but like genetically altered ants. And
Well,
the queen
okay, I was about to say, ants
right,
seems like a
could
really
be
good idea.
Right, the queen ant could be this plant, right?
You're also going to need bees, because the world cannot survive without bees.
Yeah, bees and ants, or a mixture genetic of ant bees. You already get ants in certain parts of the world that have like a symbiotic relationship with certain plants.
Yeah.
Will actually kill off other plants that are competing with theirs.
If you want an example, if I remember right, rosebuds need ants to blossom, because when the buds develop, there's this like sticky, sugary solution on the outside of them that holds it together, and the ants need to actually chew that off and take that sugar away to release the blood, so it can blossom into a flower. So yeah,
Nature's fucked up.
I have no idea how I remember that. I think I was told that when I was like 6, and I somehow remembered it. Just one-off conversation I had with my mother.
Yeah. So it's this really interesting idea, right? That you can have, various life forms reconstructed in such a way that they function in an entirely different manner. In fact, you could construct some form of plant life that grows, hybrid um, animal sections
Mhm.
throughout it. Just because you can,
Yeah, there
and
was.
can actually move itself around, right? And then like just lie down someplace throughout the day, soak up some sun, and then go hunt at night.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
now.
it'd just be a really interesting idea.
Yeah. It's.
Or you could like utilize some form of passive hunting mechanism during the daylight to just attract prey. Small things like insects or small animals to it.
Yeah, the Venus flytrap and other things like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
just like a similar method to that.
those things can digest like things like frogs.
Yeah,
It's insane.
it's
And
terrifying.
the thing is, they don't even need to get that extra nutrients from things like frogs and flies and stuff like that to survive. They can just survive like any other plant. They just also can eat other things. So yeah.
When you've leveled up so much, you got perks that have no drawback.
Oh, have you seen that YouTuber who's making his videos, Tierzu? He
I don't
talks
think so.
he talks about wildlife and like the modern world as if it is a video game, and he talks like different animals as if they were a meta of some sort, which they are. But he's referring to like, and he put this the X frog put too much of his skill points into becoming so poisonous that no one's going to want to eat him, but he can't do anything else, so he just sits there all day and he goes nowhere. It's
I mean,
absolutely amazing.
yeah, I mean, it's just like it's an interesting and in many cases useful lens to view certain things through, right?
Yeah.
And you can actually invert that process, right? You can take animals, right, the natural world around us, put it through that lens, okay, and then you can take that and then turn that into a video game or a novel, and utilize that, as the next natural extension of that, idea gathering. Because, like, say if you're writing like a fantasy novel, or if you want ideas for, enemies in a video game, it could be very useful to go out and study the real world, see how things actually, develop, and instead of just copying the form of creatures and then turning those into, some twisted monster type thing, you can also study their behavior, right? And then take that into the game world or into the fantasy setting. Which, then just it drastically increases the number of fantasy elements we have, because it's so stale right now. It's just like dragons, orcs, elves, goblins.
Yeah, that's something nice that the
Like they're basic now. I mean, they're common, right? It's barely even fantasy anymore. Because like, oh, elf, yep, no, those are vampire, got it, totally. It's mainstream. It's not fantastical anymore. There's no sense of wonder or fear or unease, right? Which is what happens when you're not constantly creating new things.
yeah.
To wow your audience.
Yeah, and that's one thing that well, not both, but like all like Star Wars, Harry Potter, and the Elder Scrolls have done well. They do have those classical things that you would expect. Like within Star Wars being more sci-fi oriented, yes, there is like a fish species. Yes, there is a shark species, but those are like out of the ordinary stuff like that. Your ordinary stuff is, let's say, a Twi'lek. Twi'lek are these humanoids that can range from any colors, from blue, green, or red, I believe, or yellow as well, and that they have tails that grow at the back of their head. That is an interesting species, and it makes sense for there to be different species that look like each other, because there could be a dominant relative in the past, the same way humans relate to monkeys, that would be a similar ancestor between humans, Twi'leks, the Chiss, for example. Those are all humanoids.
Yeah.
And then there's things that are more towards the edge of humanoids, like the Mon Calamari. If you remember Admiral Akbar, I don't know your full knowledge of Star Wars, but
Yeah.
he's towards the edge there. And then there's other ones. Trying to think of a good example of someone who's fully not a humanoid, but do you remember that bounty hunter episode? There was this mushroom guy. That's a good example of someone who's not a humanoid.
Yeah. And like, we need to get away, right, from the idea of humanoids, right? At least, I mean, not abandon it entirely, right? Because obviously there are advantages to a humanoid form, right? But there are advantages to other forms.
Yes.
And like, it's not like this is the only form that, is conducive of intelligence either, because, dolphins are very intelligent. Octopi have octopuses, actually, sorry, have a completely different form of intelligence. Like, their entire body is just brain.
Yeah.
Giant muscle brain cell. It's terrifying, by the way. So, just like, why is it that all the fantasy creatures, fantasy races are humanoid, right?
Well, I wouldn't say all of them, but
many of them are. You get your elves, your orcs, your dwarves, all your common little, even goblins. You know, the poor golem.
Yeah, well, at least
hobbits.
At least orcs and ulurks. Ulurks. I can't speak properly, but orcs were at least
Argonians.
Orcs, and at least within Lord of the Rings, do have an explanation with how they are similar to other races, that they used to be elves and they were manipulated.
Yeah, they're elves. They were corrupted, twisted. Which obviously, I don't think that was fully developed in the movies. I believe it was touched on.
It was mentioned.
But it could have been done, it was just, in a passing sort of way. But I feel like they could have done that, in a much more impactful way.
Well, it was
to really drive home how horrific that would be.
It was mentioned when Solomon was combining orcs with trolls, I believe. I think it was the combination. So it was saying that it had been done before, and I'm going to do it again today. It's just differently.
Yeah. But, imagine if they sort of showed, some sort of past scene, some elf being, turned into this twisted, mockery of what they used to be.
Well, I don't know.
That would have probably been very effective.
Yeah, but I think that's supposed to happen millions of years, or at least thousands of years before it was chosen in the movie. Because the way
yeah, but they did show, some stuff that had happened earlier. But obviously you can't show everything.
Yeah,
but that's just one of the issues that you run across when you're adapting from especially very large novel.
I don't even think I haven't wound up listening to the novels yet. But
you can't really I've never read them. I read The Hobbit. It was, I liked it, but it wasn't really my thing.
Yeah.
I like a much more trim narrative. Really, I just only want, the absolutely required things, or things that really develop the things I'm interested in.
Yeah.
I just didn't particularly enjoy The Hobbit. I was also a lot younger, which might have had a lot to do with that, not being able to fully appreciate some of the story elements that were in place.
Yeah. I haven't listened to it either, but some people really like the way Game of Thrones does it, where it will wind up explaining all the little details about all the different foods and stuff like that, and other people hate it. Hate that part about
I
it.
have read Game of Thrones. I am like halfway through the second book, but it doesn't really interest me too much. And that's just because the whole hook, right? How much do you know about Game of Thrones?
I know a little bit, but I haven't read or watched it.
Do you know what happens to Ned Stark?
I believe I heard that all the Starks have died, but that's pretty much it.
Well, they haven't all died,
Okay, I thought they
but
had.
many of them have died. Okay,
Alright.
yeah. So here's the thing: the main character in the entire first volume is Ned Stark, right? And he's like a paragon of just character, right? He's just an upstanding individual. Um, he's very loyal, very faithful. Um, and like the whole first volume, you get to know this guy. He's a great person. He's trying to do what's right in a world that's not, the people in charge are not thinking about doing what's right. They're just thinking about doing what they want to. So you really get invested in this character. You're rooting for them, and then partway through, we reach this, major climax of his story arc, where he basically is about to, essentially drive out his political adversaries from the court, and maybe start enacting some good, and preventing the rise of a very inadequate ruler to the throne. But then at like the very last second, he's completely routed. He loses entirely in this political game, and he's captured. And they're gonna, declare him a traitor, and they're gonna have him executed. And then you cue like the last section of the book where his family now is trying to rescue him, and the whole time you're rooting for him to go save him, and then you're just thinking about how awesome it's going to be when he turns it around at the last second, rise up as the hero, beat back the enemies that you've grown to hate now.
Yeah.
But that's not what happens. What Georgie does is he fucking has Ned Stark executed right there. And the entire novel, like, whenever Ned Stark is in that chapter, then that chapter is from his point of view, basically.
Yeah.
Because you're supposed to identify with him more than anyone else, right? But this chapter where he's executed, you don't get that perspective from him. It's told from someone else's perspective. And right there, you can't tell what he's thinking. You don't know, how he feels in his last moments. It's just head rolls. And the worst part is he wasn't even supposed to be executed. It was set up that he was supposed to be just exiled way up to the north, whatever. But it was very effective, both at just denial of expectation, right? So now you're invested in this character, and then the character dies, but he left them just enough time between when the character was defeated to when the character is executed, that you can get invested in the other characters, right? Which is very well written and very, very well executed. There is a lot of extraneous detail, especially in later volumes. The first one is much more tightly written in a lot of ways, but it still has large sections in it of prose that isn't necessarily plot relevant immediately, or is in many ways extraneous, but a lot of people enjoy that, right?
having those extra details in there, um, to get like a better sense of what's going on, what things look like. So that can be very interesting to many people, especially in the fantasy genre.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens is, you're invested in this character. The character disappears, but in such a way that you're now invested in other characters by this point. So it basically gave a very strong hook to pull you into the series, keep your engagement throughout the whole thing, so that you could then develop the rest of the story. And then because this character that you love so much was supposed to survive and then didn't, because of this little fuck Joffrey. Now you hate Joffrey, right? And you set him up as a major sort of focal point for animosity, which is also very effective because now every time this kid is on screen, now like this is now the king, and you have a character you're somewhat invested in who is now supposed to marry this guy, and now you really feel for her, and because she's not necessarily the strongest character yet, in fact, I really just hate her so much. She's such a fucking bitch. Like, she's one of those airheaded type chicks who just doesn't understand anything and just takes in the face value of whatever and accepts that as how it is. So she just lacks a lot of the depth that her sister has.
Yeah.
Which is why I just don't like her as much. But here she is now, set up against Joffrey, and we don't like Joffrey at all. But since she's across from the right, so now we like her a little bit more. In every encounter where they sort of run into each other, and then it just never comes up her way. And as she slowly, develops her character, you get more invested in her. So then later on, things have more weight when she's around. But, here's the thing, right? The entirety, of this series, investment-wise, to really feel what's going on, it doesn't work if Ned Stark dies, right? If there's not going to be, the last second savior of the world, then, once he's captured, you're like, all right, that's it. Now he dies, everything turns up against us. We know Joffrey. So, like, if you already have spoilers for the series, it's a lot harder to get into, and you're never going to be able to get that that feeling, right?
There is a good way you can wind up. There's a good way that you can wind up doing it, and I always go back to Star Wars, but there's a good example of it where you get Episode 4, 5, and 6. The Jedi got destroyed is something called the Clone Wars, and then comes the prequels where prequels and the extra prequel extended universe contents, and with Star Wars: The Clone Wars and stuff like that. And there's a few familiar faces that you wind up seeing, like you obviously know who Anakin Skywalker is, who Obi-Wan is, who Yoda is, and you don't know it at the time, but you find out that Palpatine's the Emperor. And so you have these connections to it, but it's in such a timeline where it's almost where both are in their own mini universes within this overall timeline, where you can get all you might possibly need to know about Ahsoka Tano. Well, maybe Ahsoka's not maybe the best example, or Jedi Master Windu, Mace Windu. You can get to know him and really like his character within the time of the Clone Wars, and before the Clone Wars, and then you have a really good ending to his story within Episode 3. And with me personally, I really did like Episode 3. It also had a lot of tie-ins for the expanded universe and explained a lot. And everything's connected.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, right? Is I feel like if you want to enjoy the Star Wars movies as much as possible, you really should watch, you know, in the original sequence, right? Not chronologically,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the way it was meant to be viewed. That's how it was developed to be viewed.
Yeah.
So things, don't work out, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't work properly if, you view them,
Mm-hmm.
starting from episode one, because then a lot of things just aren't going to have the same weight,
Yeah.
right?
No, I feel like you could change your runs a little bit with like I would almost say you should watch Rogue One before you watch Episode 4. There's nothing
Well,
in
yeah. I mean,
there's nothing
I'm
in
just
Episode
talking
4
about,
that will help you understand Rogue One.
I'm just talking about the original.
6.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
It
understand what you
actually
mean.
it reminds me there was an anime I watched some time ago. Um, like the main character had some sort of reality warping powers, and I guess is like a little nod to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, all the episodes aired out of order, right? Like
Yeah.
they aired in the order they were supposed to, but then they numbered them in a chronological order, right? But they were released outside of that and developed, to be viewed in that uh, completely different order. And like at the end of every episode, you'd have one character say, "All right, catch you next time on the next episode," and give that number. But then the main character would cite the next episode, in the sequence that it was produced to be viewed in.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like, yeah, no, fuck that shit. This is the next episode.
There's a little bit, again, I keep going back to it. There's a little bit of that within Clone Wars because the timeline within Clone Wars, obviously after the original movie, because that was the very first part of it. But the sequencing of it is in such a way that yes, there is a certain things happen after other things, and obviously everything that you see with the Phase 2 Clone Trooper armor is obviously after everything you see with the Phase 1 Clone Trooper armor, but is it set up in such a way that within Phase 1 you can watch any series, any story arc line you want in whatever order you want, and you can just flat out skip it and you're going to be fine. There's going to be some callbacks, but there's not going to be ones that you have to know to enjoy the content either. So you can go jump right in, and the first thing you watch is the Maul story arc line that goes over two different stories. Or you can jump right into the original one where Yoda's going down to that planet and gets shot down and escapes in the escape pod. It goes through those essentially the droid trials. You can do what's another good one that I can think of? You can do the arc that involves one of the arcs that involves the Dathomir and Night Sisters. You can just watch whatever order you want. There's no particular way you're supposed to watch it. It's just they released it based off of what they felt like would go good at that time.
Right.
Also, I would completely skip the droids arc because I do not like it that much. Though the final episode is kind of decent. You see Gregor, a clone commando.
Yeah, but the thing is, stories that are built around some massive, twist or denial of expectation, right? They'll never have the same impact if on your first viewing you already know what's going to happen, because you're not going to be feeling the investment, and then things don't go the way that you expected, or something comes completely blindside you, and it can make it difficult then to really care about the series right after that, which is why I really can't enjoy Game of Thrones. Just because I can't be invested in characters that I know are going to die,
Yeah.
right? Because it's constantly in the back of my head. I'm just thinking, well, that fucker's dead, so cool, I guess. It's kind of like it's probably very similar to the Han Solo movie, right? Where you're probably gonna get a lot of people watching it and they're saying like, "Oh, this is," cool, but we know he dies. You know, eventually, and we've seen it already. So I just don't feel like this is.
Now, Han Solo has a lot of time within it. There's actually a recent book that came out, a short story, only 4 hours long if you're listening to it on Audible. But it's just about one of his adventures. Adventures that happened right after Episode 4.
And like they're interesting, right? But the thing is, you can't use danger, right, as a form of as a plot element, right? At least not to that character, right? So if the movie comes out and they're like putting Han Solo in dangerous positions, expecting that to increase tension, right? That's not very effective, right? Because he's going to escape unharmed.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is not where he dies.
Well, that's why you have supporting characters.
Yeah, and you need them, but if they don't realize that, if the director or the screenwriter, isn't really understanding that people aren't really going to be invested, in any sort of danger to the main character,
Mm-hmm.
There are certain things that just aren't effective once, and that's just the danger of, like, an intermittent story,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you're creating some story inside of a story, but this new story wasn't planned to exist originally,
Mm-hmm.
so then you have to like constrain everything in there to what you've developed before and after that, because you can't have things in there that don't exist later on,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you can't have like Han Solo has his cut off, right? Because we know he had his fucking arm later.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also Star Wars with cybernetics, where you can have a cybernetic limb, but not have it be known. Like, look at Luke's hand. Most people don't think, with the exception of Last Jedi, that Luke has a robotic hand until it just so happens to matter, which is all right. I mean, the way I look at it is that there's people who are in charge of writing the Star Wars story, and the actual writers of it are really good at introducing stories that has happened within a previous part of time within the universe. I mean, they've been doing it from day one, and they've been doing it well. Look at Rogue One. Rogue One, the way it was written on screen, they developed the story for an on-screen experience, but they developed it in such a way that it was written like a novel. Like within your Star Wars novel, you're most likely going to have one or two main characters, normally two, and you'll have a side character with a side story that has something to do with your main character or your title character. So within Rogue One, you have Jyn Erso, and then you have, I can't remember his name, the Rebel spy commando. And then you also have Director Krennic, his little side arc, fighting back and forth and bickering with Grand Moff Tarkin through it with dealing with the Death Star project. Like the way they wrote that within the Thrawn book, you have your main character, you have a direct supporting character, and you have a sub-supporting character which has her own plot line. So you have Mithron Naruto, Thrawn, and you have Eli Vanto, who is a supporting character, goes around with him, and then you have Miranda Price, which follows her own plot. She does meet and she does work with Thrawn at parts in the book, but through her, you get to see a completely different storyline with the politics of the Empire versus Thrawn, where you're seeing a lot of things from the military side of the Empire. And through that, you get to see fully about how the Empire actually works and how Coruscant actually works. All the books have thus far been following that primarily, and that seems like how they're going to be trying to write the majority of the movies. I mean, you can look at Rogue One for an example. What you saw on screen is written the way you would do a book. except it was a film appearance, not a literature appearance. So yeah. Well, we've hit over an hour now. If you want to stop, we didn't talk about how long we want to make this. So I'll let you do any outro you might possibly want, because obviously this is yours.
All right, so I'll leave things here.
Alright. I'll do something a little bit better. If anyone watches this, the two of you who might possibly watch this, it's not the two of us. Let us know what you think, please, 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 because we have no idea what we're doing. I made this little background and template, and it looked horrible, but we needed something. I just don't want a black wall. Bye.